This is what her uncle did to her. Before we begin the story, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Do not forget to like and comment for more interesting stories. The days following Amina's first sickness were filled with uncertainty. She ignored the whispers at school, convincing herself that it was merely a passing ailment. But her body told a different story. Her appetite shifted, and exhaustion crept over her more often. When her uniform began to feel tighter, a cold dread filled her heart. One afternoon, after school, Amina walked to the local clinic. It was a modest structure with chipped paint and a faded sign that read, Kendu Bay Health Center. The nurse, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, asked her a series of questions before conducting the tests. The silence in the room felt deafening as Amina waited. The nurse returned with the results, her expression unreadable. "You're pregnant," she said softly. Amina's world collapsed. The words echoed in her mind, each syllable striking her like a hammer. Pregnant. The weight of her reality crushed her, leaving her unable to speak. She staggered out of the clinic, her legs weak, her vision blurred by tears. That evening, as she walked home, she replayed the night Obuya had stolen her innocence. Rage and despair churned inside her. She wanted to scream, to confront him, to demand justice, but fear silenced her. She knew the truth. In this world, people like her rarely found justice. When she arrived at the Obusha household, Mama Ruth was waiting for her. "Why are you late?" Ruth barked. "I wasn't feeling well," Amina mumbled, avoiding eye contact. Ruth scoffed. "Stop making excuses and get to work." Amina obeyed, her mind racing. She needed to think, to figure out her next move. But the oppressive walls of the house gave her no space to breathe. Every time she saw Obuya, her stomach turned. His casual demeanor, as if nothing had happened, enraged her. She avoided him as much as possible, but in a small house, escape was limited. A month later, her secret was no longer concealable. Her growing belly betrayed her. Ruth noticed first, her sharp eyes narrowing as she observed Amina one morning. "What's going on with you?" Ruth demanded, pointing at Amina's stomach. Amina froze, unable to form words. Ruth's gaze darkened. "Are you pregnant?" When Amina didn't respond, Ruth erupted. "You ungrateful little girl! After everything we've done for you, who is responsible for this?" Amina hesitated, her lips trembling. She wanted to scream Obuya's name, to expose the monster he was, but fear gripped her. If Ruth didn't believe her, or worse, if she blamed her, what would happen then? "It's no one from school," Amina whispered, evading the question. Ruth slapped her across the face, her palm stinging against Amina's cheek. "You think you can play games with me?" she hissed. "Wait here." Ruth stormed out of the room, returning moments later with Obuya. Amina's stomach churned as she saw his face. He smirked, his expression smug. "What's going on?" he asked casually. "This girl," Ruth spat, pointing at Amina. "She's pregnant. Tell me, Obuya, did you have anything to do with this?" Obuya's smirk faltered, but only for a moment. He shook his head. "Me? With her? Don't be ridiculous. She's lying." Ruth turned back to Amina, her eyes blazing with fury. "So you're accusing my husband now? You wicked, filthy girl!" Obuya's demeanor shifted, his voice rising. "Get her out of here, Ruth. She's nothing but trouble." Together, Ruth and Obuya dragged Amina to the door. She cried, begging them to let her stay, but they ignored her. Ruth grabbed Amina's small bundle of belongings and threw them into the dirt. Obuya shoved her roughly, and she stumbled, landing on her knees. "You're nothing but a curse," Ruth spat. "Don't ever show your face here again," Amina sobbed, clutching her stomach as she crawled to gather her things. The baby inside her kicked, a cruel reminder of the life she carried, a life born of violence and despair. She glanced back at the house one last time, but Ruth slammed the door shut with finality. The cold night air greeted her as she wandered through the village. the weight of her belongings pulling on her shoulders. Memories of her parents flooded her mind, their love a distant dream now. She thought of the nights she had spent under trees and in abandoned shacks after her relatives had thrown her out. And here she was again, back where she started. For days, Amina roamed, her stomach growling with hunger, her body weak. The villagers avoided her, their judgmental stares burning into her back. The whispers followed her everywhere. "She's just like her mother," one woman sneered. "Such a disgrace," another muttered. Amina kept walking, her head down. She knew better than to beg. The village had no sympathy for the vulnerable. She found refuge in an abandoned kiosk at the edge of the market. At night, she huddled in a corner, wrapping herself in her thin shawl to ward off the cold. Her baby kicked sometimes, a reminder that she was not entirely alone. One morning, as she scavenged for food scraps near the market, she saw Miss Atieno, her former teacher. The sight of the kind woman brought tears to her eyes. She hesitated, ashamed of her condition, but hunger pushed her forward. "Miss Atieno," Amina called softly. The teacher turned, her eyes widening when she saw Amina. "Amina, what happened to you?" Amina broke down, tears streaming down her face as she recounted everything: the betrayal of her uncles, the abuse by Obuya, and the pregnancy that had cost her everything. Miss Atieno listened intently, her expression a mix of sorrow and anger. "You've been through so much," Miss Atieno said, placing a hand on Amina's shoulder. "Come with me." Miss Atieno took Amina to her modest home, a small but cozy space filled with books and warmth. She prepared a meal for Amina, who ate hungrily, the first proper food she'd had in days. Afterward, Miss Atieno handed her a clean dress and a blanket. "You can stay here for now," she said, "but we need to figure out a long-term plan." Amina nodded, gratitude filling her heart. For the first time in weeks, she felt safe. She slept soundly that night, the weight of her troubles temporarily lifted. Over the next few weeks, Amina began to rebuild her life with Miss Atieno's help. She received prenatal care and joined a women's support group in a nearby town. The women welcomed her, sharing stories of hardship and resilience. For the first time, Amina felt like she belonged, but her peace was short-lived. One evening, as she walked back from a meeting with the group, she sensed someone following her. Her heartbeat quickened. She glanced over her shoulder, but saw nothing. Picking up her pace, she tried to dismiss the feeling. As she reached Miss Atieno's gate, a shadowy figure stepped out from the darkness. Amina froze, her breath catching in her throat. "We need to talk," the figure said, his voice low and familiar. It was Obuya. Amina's blood ran cold. She clutched her stomach protectively, backing away. "What do you want?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Obuya took a step closer, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You think you can ruin my life and get away with it?" he hissed. Before Amina could respond, he lunged toward her, and the world around her seemed to freeze. To be continued,